the pristine beauty of the Sierra Nevada mountains, a landmark for westward expansion. But for one group in 1846, this became a chilling prison. The tale of the Donner Party is one of the most notorious and tragic episodes in the history of westward migration in the United States. It is a story of desperation, endurance, and the dark lengths to which people may go when faced with insurmountable adversity. The events surrounding this ill-fated group serve as a stark reminder of the many perils early pioneers faced on their journeys to the American West. It seems anything and everything that could have gone wrong, in fact, did. In this video, we'll be discussing the horrible decision-making that would lead to 46 deaths in the grisly and harrowing journey of the Donner Party. Welcome to another episode of Stranger History. If you like learning about our strange history, please like and subscribe and leave a comment below. The 19th century was a time of exploration and hope. Thousands journeyed to the American West seeking a better life. The ethos of manifest destiny, the belief that Americans were divinely destined to span the continent, permeated the national psyche. This philosophy, combined with a sense of nationalistic duty, inspired many to venture west and claim the land for further expansion of the United States. By the mid-19th century, the American West had become synonymous with opportunity. Tales of vast, fertile lands waiting to be claimed, and the promise of a prosperous future for those willing to brave the journey fueled the imaginations of many. The Oregon and California territories in particular were often romanticized as lands of boundless potential, beckoning to those in the eastern and central states. Many members of the Donner Party, like countless others, were driven by economic considerations. The Panic of 1837 and the subsequent economic downturn had left many, including families from Illinois and other Midwestern states, in search of a fresh start. The prospect of acquiring large tracts of land at minimal cost in California or Oregon seemed a solution to their financial woes. Specific members of the party had personal motivations as well. James F. Reed, for instance, hoped to expand his business ventures in the burgeoning Californian economy. George Donner was already 60 when he led the Donner Party and likely emanated a paternal aura which could have been comforting to fellow travelers. George Donner, the party's namesake, sought a comfortable retirement and a prosperous legacy for his offspring. Various guidebooks and accounts of the westward journey painted an enticing picture of the West. One such influential figure was Lansford W. Hastings, whose writings on the so-called Hastings Cutoff, from his book The Emigrant's Guide to Oregon and California. A supposed shortcut to California greatly influenced the Donner Party's ill-fated route decision. A former soldier turned entrepreneur who fought with Abraham Lincoln in the Black Hawk War, James F. Reed was a proud and stubborn man who took Hastings' book as gospel and was thought to be the real leader of the party. In the spring of 1846, a group of nearly 90 emigrants led by James F. Reed and George Donner set out from Springfield, Illinois, with their eyes set on the fertile lands of California. These pioneers, motivated by the promise of a better life, embarked on the well-traveled Oregon Trail. It wasn't long, however, before the group made their first fateful decision that would seal their predestination. Now, it was a well-known fact that the jump-off point to head west was Independence, Missouri, and any party heading west should not leave from here later than April 1st to avoid winter and snow in the Sierra Nevada mountains. The Donner Party didn't leave Independence, Missouri until May 12th, which became their first fateful mistake. While a few weeks might seem inconsequential at the outset, any delay could potentially compound future problems. As the Donner Party moved westward, they faced various challenges, including disagreements among group members, wagon breakdowns, and difficulties in navigating, injuries, and even deaths. These issues further delayed their progress. The first setback upon traveling was the death of Sarah Keyes. The mother-in-law of James F. Reed at the outset of the journey was already in her 70s, and she suffered from consumption or tuberculosis. Despite her advanced age and illness, She decided to join the expedition due to her desire to be buried in the West, next to her son, who had died years earlier. As the Donner Party commenced their journey in the spring of 1846, it became evident that the trip would be strenuous for Sarah Keyes. Her health deteriorated rapidly as the party made its way westward. By the time they reached what is now known as Alcove Spring in Kansas, Sarah Keyes succumbed to her illness and passed away on May 29, 1846. The wagon trains at this point were a conglomerate of different groups, some heading to California and some heading to Oregon. Having to deal with the elements and with so many personalities, and the novelty of camping out had worn thin, tensions were relatively high amongst the men, and fights would break out but were eventually subdued. But despite these early conflicts and setbacks, spirits were still relatively high. On June 16th, Tamsin Donner, wife of George Donner, wrote to her cousin to sum up her state of mind at that point in words that would become monumentally ironic and chilling. Indeed, if I do not experience something far worse than I have yet done, I shall say the trouble is all in getting started. On June 27th, the party reached Fort Laramie, a significant trading post on the Oregon Trail. Here, Reed would cross paths with Jim Clyman. Jim Clyman was an experienced mountain man and frontier guide, well-versed in the challenges of the Western trails, and had served with Reed in the Black Hawk War. Clyman had just traveled the Hastings Cutoff. A route promoted by Lansford W. Hastings was a supposed shortcut to California, though it had not been sufficiently tested for wagon travel. Aware of the perils and challenges of the Hastings Cutoff, Clyman explicitly warned Reed against taking this route. He detailed the rough terrains, the vast expanses of the Great Salt Lake Desert, and the thickets of the Wasatch Mountains, all of which would pose significant challenges to a wagon train. Clyman emphasized that the established Oregon Trail, though longer, was a safer and more proven option for such a journey. Despite Clyman's stark warnings and first-hand experience, Reed, influenced by the promise of a quicker route to California, opted for the Hastings Cutoff. This decision was backed by the allure of reaching California sooner, potentially securing the best lands and opportunities before others. Reed's optimism and perhaps a sense of adventure might have overshadowed Clyman's cautionary tales. Upon reaching Fort Bridger, Edwin Bryant, a journalist, left a letter that he intended for James F. Reed. The letter contained warnings and advice from Hastings about the difficulties of the new route through the Wasatch Mountains. Jim Bridger and Luis Vasquez operated Fort Bridger and stood to profit from emigrants stopping at their post. They were also aware of the Hastings Cutoff and knew that if travelers took that route, they would be more likely to pass through their trading post. When the Donner Party arrived at Fort Bridger, Reed did not directly receive Bryant's letter, which contained crucial warnings about the route ahead. It is believed that Bridger and Vasquez, hoping to direct more traffic and business to their fort, either downplayed the difficulties mentioned in Bryant's letter or withheld it entirely. The omission or potential misrepresentation of the information in Bryant's letter was a significant factor in the Donner Party's decision to take the Hastings Cutoff and would contribute to the deaths of 46 people. The route proved to be more challenging and time-consuming than they had anticipated, leading to a series of delays and, eventually, their tragic winter entrapment in the Sierra Nevada mountains. As the Donner Party entered the Wasatch Mountains in late July 1846, they quickly encountered thick, dense forests and rugged terrain. The area was not suited for wagon travel, especially for a party of their size. The pioneers soon realized that they had to carve out their own trail, an endeavor that proved both time-consuming and exhausting. While Hastings had left notes on trees and occasional markers for guidance, his directions were often unclear or insufficient for the challenges the party faced. Additionally, as the Donner Party progressed, they realized that Hastings himself had never taken wagons through this route, amplifying the difficulty of the terrain they encountered. Each day in the Wasatch Mountains was a battle against nature. The pioneers had to chop down trees, clear brush, and maneuver their wagons through steep inclines and narrow canyons. Their progress was painstakingly slow, often covering just a few miles a day. As days turned into weeks, supplies began dwindling, and the morale of the group started to wane. James Reed, along with a few others, decided to go ahead to find Hastings, who was guiding another group, and seek advice on navigating the challenging terrain. Although they did meet Hastings, his advice was vague, merely suggesting they find a way around the mountains or through the thickets. After nearly 3 grueling weeks of cutting through the Wasatch Mountains, the Donner Party finally emerged, only to be met with the vast expanse of the Great Salt Lake Desert. The hardships of the mountains, combined with the delays, meant they had to face the desert ill-prepared and exhausted. The supposed shortcut through the Wasatch Mountains took 68 days. The parties that went the normal route reached the same point in just 37 days. Hastings' cutoff was supposed to be 350 miles shorter, and in actuality turned out to be 125 miles longer than the normal route. Upon their laborious exit from the Wasatch Mountains in August 1846, the Donner Party was confronted with the vast, intimidating expanse of the Great Salt Lake Desert. Their journey through the dense forests and rugged terrain of the mountains had already cost them valuable time and resources, leaving them ill-prepared for the desert crossing. The Great Salt Lake Desert presented a stark contrast to the Wasatch Mountains. Instead of forests and slopes, the pioneers faced miles of salt flats, mirages, and a relentless sun. They initially believed the crossing would take 2 days, based on Hastings' advice. However, the trek across the salt flats alone took 5 grueling days. The soft ground made wagon travel challenging, with wheels often sinking into the mud-like salt surface. Water sources were scarce in the desert. The party's oxen, already weakened from the journey through the mountains, began to die or wander off in delirium from thirst. Many of the pioneers had to abandon their wagons, belongings, and precious provisions, further reducing their chances of a successful journey. The physical challenges of the desert crossing were exacerbated by diminishing morale and growing desperation. Members of the party began to suffer from dehydration and exhaustion. The parties were also very unhygienic. They stank of urine, feces, menstrual blood, yeast infections, halitosis, and tooth decay. Disagreements arose, leading to divisions within the group. As they moved further into the desert, the reality of their predicament became clear. The Hastings cutoff, rather than being a shortcut, was a dangerous and time-consuming detour. When the Donner Party finally emerged from the Great Salt Lake Desert, they were a shadow of their former selves. They had lost valuable time, many of their animals, wagons, and provisions. Their ordeal in the desert was a precursor to the challenges still to come, notably their fateful entrapment in the Sierra Nevada mountains. On October 5, 1846, as the party was making its way through the challenging terrains of the Sierra Nevada foothills, tensions were already running high due to the arduous conditions and diminished supplies. The oxen were becoming increasingly difficult to control. On this fateful day, one of Reed's oxen became entangled with John Snyder's team. John Snyder was a teamster in the party, responsible for driving and managing the oxen teams that pulled the wagons, and was well liked amongst the group. As Reed tried to free the ox, Snyder grew frustrated, resulting in a heated exchange of words. The verbal disagreement rapidly escalated to violence. Snyder, in his anger, struck Reed with a whip. Reed, reacting to the assault and perhaps in self-defense, drew a knife and fatally stabbed Snyder. The exact dynamics of the altercation remain a matter of historical debate, with varying accounts suggesting that it was either a heated moment of passion or a more deliberate act by Reed. Given the gravity of the situation, the members of the Donner Party felt compelled to address the incident. A council was hastily convened to decide Reed's fate. Opinions within the party were divided. Some believed that Reed should be hanged for his actions, while others argued for leniency, given the stresses of the journey and the circumstances of the altercation. Ultimately, the party decided against executing Reed. However, in light of the prevailing tensions, and for the sake of group cohesion, they banished him from the group, forcing him to travel alone without his family. By late October 1846, the Donner Party approached the Sierra Nevada range, expecting to traverse it before the onset of heavy winter snow. However, due to a series of misjudgments, delays, and the ill-fated decision to take the untested Hastings Cutoff earlier in their journey, the group was running perilously late in the season. As they began their ascent, an early snowstorm struck, blocking their way forward at the high mountain pass, which would later be known as Donner Pass. With their way forward impeded, the party was forced to backtrack and set up camp at the eastern edge of the range near Truckee Lake, now known as Donner Lake. Another group, including George Donner, established a camp a few miles away at Alder Creek. They believed their stay would be brief, perhaps only until the snow melted a bit, allowing for safer passage. However, the snow kept falling, and the party's situation grew increasingly dire. The shelters they constructed were rudimentary and provided limited protection from the harsh conditions. The tents and lean-tos, made primarily from ox hides and whatever materials they had at hand, were no match for the relentless snow and freezing temperatures. Food supplies rapidly dwindled. The group's livestock, primarily oxen and cattle, were quickly consumed. Attempts to hunt or find any other sources of sustenance were largely futile given the snow-covered landscape. Some members of the party, recognizing the severity of their situation, organized expeditions to cross the mountains and seek help. These treacherous journeys, made on homemade snowshoes, were fraught with danger. This faction of the party would later become known as the Forlorn Hope. Many who attempted them perished, while others, driven to the brink of human endurance, resorted to cannibalism to survive. Family members fed upon each other, and heads and limbs were removed to make the bodies seem less human while butchering. Some members of the party would also result in murdering 2 Miwok Indians sent to guide and aid the party out of the mountain. Back at the main camp, conditions continued to deteriorate. With food supplies exhausted, some members also resorted to consuming hides, bones, and eventually, the bodies of those who had already succumbed to starvation or the cold. The psychological and emotional toll of the situation was immense. Despair, guilt, and hopelessness gripped many in the group. It wasn't until late February 1847 that the first relief party led by James F. Reed from California managed to reach the stranded emigrants. Over the next 2 months, 3 more relief expeditions were organized. By the time the final relief party arrived in late April, of the original group of 87 members, only 48 had survived. Upon their rescue, the initial emotion was undoubtedly one of overwhelming relief. For months, they had faced starvation, frigid temperatures, and the grim specter of death. To be pulled from the brink of such despair was a cause for deep gratitude. However, this gratitude was also tinged with grief for the loved ones they had lost and the unspeakable acts they had witnessed or participated in. As the survivors reintegrated into society, many grappled with the stigma attached to their ordeal, especially the tales of cannibalism that had spread far and wide. Some chose to speak little of their experience, hoping to put the horrors behind them and shield their families from the gruesome details. Others faced their trauma more openly, sharing their stories in hopes of finding catharsis or ensuring that the true nature of their experiences was understood. The sentiment of guilt was a heavy burden for many. Even if they did not partake in the act of cannibalism, the mere knowledge that it had occurred and the understanding of the desperation that led to it weighed on their consciences. This guilt was often accompanied by nightmares, flashbacks, and other symptoms we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Yet, amongst the trauma, there were also remarkable stories of resilience. Many survivors went on to lead full lives, carving out existences in the very Californian lands they had suffered so much to reach. They built families, participated in their communities, and contributed to the burgeoning development of the American West. Some even became advocates for other pioneers, ensuring they had adequate information and resources to prevent another tragedy like the Donner Parties. Public perception of the survivors varied. While many viewed them with sympathy and admiration for their perseverance, others viewed them with suspicion and disdain, focusing on the more macabre aspects of their ordeal. The survivors, for their part, sought to navigate these perceptions with dignity, focusing on rebuilding their lives. In the broader context of American history, the sentiments of the Donner Party survivors serve as a potent reminder of the human costs of westward expansion. Their resilience, trauma, and the complex web of emotions they navigated provide a deeply human perspective on a period often characterized by rugged individualism and manifest destiny. Their experiences underscore the idea that beyond the broad strokes of historical events lie individual stories of pain, hope, and the indomitable will to survive. So what's your opinion on the Donner Party? Would you have approached their situation differently? Please tell us in the comment section below, and remember to like and subscribe if you like learning more about our strange history.